During a visit to NATO, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson showed himself to be, not so historically grounded. At a press conference, he started his speech with the age of the alliance, and, once again, was wrong. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson raised eyebrows at a press conference with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, and because Johnson began his speech on Thursday with the words, "When NATO was founded more than 75 years ago, although the military alliance founded in 1949 will not be able to celebrate that birthday until 2024. The faux pas was perceived as particularly notable because Johnson had hosted the 70th anniversary summit in London in 2019 when he was mayor. NATO was founded in Washington on April 4th in 1949 by the USA, France, Great Britain, and 9 other Western countries. Oh no, he was prime minister, not mayor, by the way. NATO is urging Russia to hold further talks in the NATO-Russia Council. At a press conference with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in Brussels on Thursday, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said he had sent a letter to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and repeated the invitation to continue the dialogue. It's about moving forward on the diplomatic path. Stoltenberg again described the current situation with the Russian troop deployment on the border with Ukraine in gloomy words. This is a dangerous moment for European security, he said. And he said, the number of Russian soldiers is increasing. The warning time for a possible attack is getting shorter. On Friday night, the United States asked its citizens to leave Ukraine as soon as possible. And Johnson warned Europe was facing the most dangerous moment in decades. In his view, Russia has not yet decided on an attack, but that doesn't mean that something absolutely catastrophic couldn't happen very soon, the Prime Minister said. Johnson also did not rule out further British troop reinforcements in Eastern Europe. And Stoltenberg warned that further Russian aggression would lead to more NATO presence, not less. With more than 100,000 soldiers on Russia's border with Ukraine, there are fears in the West that the Kremlin is considering an invasion of its neighboring country. However, it is also considered possible that fears are only being stirred up in order to persuade the NATO states to make concessions when demands for new security guarantees are made. Moscow wants to get NATO to rule out further eastern expansion and in particular the admission of Ukraine. In addition, Russia is demanding a withdrawal of NATO troops from Eastern Alliance states. Plans to invade Ukraine, on the other hand, are regularly denied. The NATO-Russia Council is the main forum for talks between Moscow and the military alliance, and at the first conference in around 2.5 years, both sides exchanged views on the Ukraine conflict and other current controversial issues for around 4 hours in January. However, Moscow has not yet responded to Stoltenberg's invitation to a series of further meetings. And when the fun starts again in the Ukraine crisis, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his British colleague Liz Truss then also settled their disputes on the open stage. After a 2-hour conversation on Thursday, Lavrov accused Truss of having traveled to Moscow unprepared. Our detailed explanations fell on unprepared ground at least once, Lavrov said at a joint press conference. Truss in turn warned that peace and stability in Europe were threatened by Russia. There is still time for Russia to end its aggression against Ukraine and embark on the path of diplomacy, she said. Among other things, the British demanded the withdrawal of Russian troops near the Ukrainian border. The rally has been fueling fears in the West of a possible attack by Moscow on Ukraine for weeks, and as I said, which the Kremlin always denies. Truss also accused the Russian side of Cold War rhetoric during her visit to Moscow. Lavrov was visibly upset and indicated that Truss should not have come for such a conversation. It's been a long time since I took part in diplomatic negotiations that could have been conducted live, complained the 71-year-old, who is Europe's longest-serving foreign minister. Because we have heard nothing secret, nothing confidential, except what is constantly heard from the high stands in London. Well, it's the first time I understand Lavrov, because that he's annoyed with Truss is not a big surprise. Relations between Russia and Britain are at a low ebb because of a multitude of conflicts. For example, London has repeatedly criticized human rights violations in the case of the imprisoned Kremlin opponent Alexei Navalny, rightly so, as I say. But most recently, in an unprecedented warning, the British government accused the Kremlin of wanting to establish a pro-Russian leadership in Kiev. There's still no talk of any relaxation in the Ukraine crisis. On the contrary, on this point, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg fully agrees with his guest from London, with Boris Johnson. Europe is experiencing the most dangerous moment in the greatest security crisis in a very long time, says British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, pointing out that the Russian troop deployment on the Ukrainian borders is continuing unabated. According to NATO information, Moscow has moved as many troops to neighboring Belarus as it did last time during the Cold War, allegedly for joint maneuvers. In the Black Sea, Moscow has warships practiced for emergency, which has caused sharp criticism in the West. Johnson rejects security guarantees. The number of Russian armed forces is increasing, but the warning time for a possible attack is decreasing, as I said. That's what Stoltenberg fears. And Johnson also speaks of rather gloomy Secret Service reports and warns of a war that would be senseless, tragic, and economically very expensive for Russia. I don't know if Moscow has already decided on an attack, but that doesn't mean something absolutely catastrophic can't happen soon. Well, the British Prime Minister also resolutely rejects the Russian demand for security guarantees, such as the renunciation of a further expansion of NATO. There must be no going back to a time when some great powers decided the fate of other countries over their heads, said the British Prime Minister. Yeah, tell that to Northern Ireland and Scotland. In order to resolve the conflict, the Western Defence Alliance wants to stay on course and rely on a mixture of the threat of sanctions, military unity and diplomacy. At their meeting next week, the NATO defence ministers will discuss strengthening the so-called battle groups, the combat troops in the southeast of the alliance area. Great Britain already promised that it would provide more soldiers, ships and aircraft. At the same time, NATO reaffirms its willingness to talk. In a letter to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Secretary General Stoltenberg called for further negotiations to be used in the NATO-Russia Council to defuse the crisis, as I said in the start of the video. We proposed mutual briefings on military maneuvers, on more transparency to avoid misunderstandings, and on arms control issues, including nuclear weapons and short and medium-range ground-launched missiles, he said. However, it is uncertain whether the Russian side will accept the offer of talks. The answer from Moscow to the letter from NATO is, as I said, still pending. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.